In this tutorial, I will explain how to get a where I am to connect to existing database tables. I will also show you how to connect to an Active Directory or LDAP server. Normally, when you develop your application, you don't need to worry where and how your data will be stored. You only select the database engine when you install a where I am, and after that, a where I am fully manages your database tables behind the scenes. It creates tables for new objects, deletes them when objects are deleted, and makes modifications to the structure of these tables whenever you add, modify, or delete attributes of business objects. In addition, a where I am automatically creates SQL select statements to read data from the database. All of this happens automatically behind the scenes, and you don't need to worry about the details or even know anything about the database technology. Sometimes, though, you need to use existing data stored in database tables created by other software or in network servers such as LDAP or Active Directory. There are at least two scenarios when you may want to do this. You have a legacy system that you want to completely transfer to a where I am. Or you have an existing database software system or systems or a network server, and you want to continue using this system. However, you also want to add an extension to the system to be managed by a where I am. For the first scenario, the recommended approach is to configure a new application using a where I am and then import the operational data from the legacy database into a where I am. For the second scenario, you can get a where I am to use the data stored in the existing tables or a network server by configuring business objects with the persistence option Database Existing External or LDAP. With this approach, you can configure new business objects managed automatically by a where I am, but also have business objects that will be shared between a where I am and other software systems or network servers that already use the data. When you define a business object with the Database Existing External or LDAP persistence options, a where I am will automatically import columns of the required database tables or data definitions of the network server and convert them into business object attributes. You can get a where I am to read and write data to the existing database tables or network servers, but you cannot modify the structure of the existing tables, so you will not be able to add, delete, or rename attributes of such objects. Let's look at an example. Suppose we want to provide a web user interface to one of the tables in the MySQL system database, which is called MySQL. The table is called help_topic, and it contains help for MySQL. If you have a MySQL database, you can have a look at this table. The first thing we need to do is to create a new business object that corresponds to this table. So let's create a new business object and call it MySQL help. Let's have a look at the persistence property of the object. By default, a where I am creates business objects with persistence type of a where I am automatic. These are business objects stored in the database that a where I am manages automatically. Since our database table already exists outside of a where I am, we need to change this setting to be Database Existing External. First, we need to select the database environment that describes how to connect to the existing database, MySQL in our case. If there are no database environments yet, we need to create one by clicking on the Add button. This is only done once, so if we have several tables in MySQL that we want to create business objects for, we only need to create the environment when we create the first business object. So let's provide the name of the environment, MySQL. And then we need to select the database engine. AwareIM offers several predefined database engines to help you specify connection parameters. If your database engine is not among the predefined engines, you need to select Custom. When we select a particular database engine, a predefined or custom, AwareIM displays connection parameters specific to this database engine. When you select the custom database engine, you need to make sure that you have the JDBC driver that allows connections to your databases from Java. JDBC drivers exist virtually for all known databases, so AwareIM can connect to pretty much any database. Many database vendors include JDBC drivers as part of their database offerings. If they don't, you can almost always find a third-party JDBC driver. A JDBC driver is usually distributed as a file with a jar extension. You need to make sure that you put this jar file in the AwareIM custom jars directory. Then you need to specify a fully qualified name of the driver class and connection URL string. You need to check the documentation of your JDBC driver for details. In our case, though, we can select MySQL and specify parameters. For MySQL database, we need to specify MySQL account credentials, machine name where MySQL server is running if it's not the local machine, the port where MySQL is listening for requests if it's not the default one, and also the name of the database. We will use the default settings and only provide the username and the password, which is actually blank in my case. We also provide the name of the database. After we create the database environment, we need to specify the name of the table or view in the existing database that we want to use. So we provide the name of the table, help topic, and then we click on the Discover Attributes button. At this point, AwareIM will automatically discover all database columns that the specified table or view has and convert them into the corresponding attributes. The results are displayed in the attributes table here. We should then define a primary key for the database columns, which is the attribute or attributes that uniquely identify the record in the database table. For example, a unique ID, surname, email address, and so on. If we do not define a primary key, AwareIM will be able to perform queries on the business object, but it will not be able to display individual instances, create new instances, or delete the existing ones. Note that AwareIM will automatically set the primary key of the table if this primary key is defined in the table definition. Here we can see that AwareIM automatically created the primary key for the help topic ID column. That's it. Our business object is now ready, and we can use it in queries, forms, business rules, processes, and so on, just like we use any other business object. Let's, for example, define a query that will display some attributes of this object. So we will define a query called MySQL help, and it will look for all instances of the MySQL help object, already selected here. Let's go to the Display Attributes property and select name and URL as attributes to be displayed. Let's also go to the expansion of rows property and display the values of description and example attributes when a row is expanded, like so. Here we enclose attribute names in curly brackets. Let's also define an operation that allows us to navigate to the form of the record. Let's see now how this works. I put the version under test and log into the application using the browser. I will run our query using the system menu for administrators. So we can see all the help information from MySQL here. The description and example are on the row expansion. We can navigate to the form of the object and even change or delete this data if need be. I don't really want to do this here though. So that's how simple it is to use the power of a where I am to provide a web user interface to already existing database tables and software systems. Not only can you connect like this to existing database tables, but you can also connect and provide web user interface to the Active Directory of your server or to any other LDAP server. Let me show you. Here I have a small freeware program that allows me to connect to any LDAP server. I have connected to a Debian LDAP server, access to which is freely available. This tree here shows the entries that I have in this server. Let's connect to this server from where I am and display all available hosts, for example. These are the hosts that we have. Doing it is very similar to what we just did for the existing database table connection. First, we need to create a new business object representing the Debian server. We'll call it Debian host. Then we need to specify LDAP as a persistence type for this object. Just like we defined a connection with the existing database, we need to define a connection with the LDAP server first. Again, it only needs to be done once for all objects managed by the server. Let's give it a name and specify the URL of the machine. The server does not need any username or password, and it listens on the default port 389. Now we need to provide a distinguished name for any entry on this server that will correspond to a business object instance. Let's take any host entry, for example the first one. We can find out the distinguished name from our LDAP viewer program. So this is the first entry, and this bit here defines the distinguished name. I paste the distinguished name here, and I also need to provide the parent node under which all objects reside. So the distinguished name of the parent node will be just this. Now we can click on the Discover Attributes button, and AwareIM automatically determines business object attributes that correspond to the LDAP attributes of this and all other similar entries. So when we log into our application now, we can search for Debian host objects using the administrator menu like this. And here we can see all our LDAP entries, and we can modify them if necessary. Note that a popular Microsoft Active Directory is also an LDAP server, so you can connect to it in very much the same way. Let's go back now to discovering attributes of existing database tables. We have gone through the scenario when AwareIM automatically discovers columns of an existing database table and converts them to attributes of a business object. What about relationships? Can AwareIM automatically discover relationships between existing database tables? Many relationships between database tables are represented as a foreign key, where one table refers to another one by storing a primary key of some record in another table. The column or columns storing the primary key are called the foreign key. A table definition may also contain a foreign key constraint telling the database engine that a particular column is a foreign key. If a relationship between tables is represented by a foreign key, AwareIM can discover such a relationship and create a reference attribute representing the relationship. Let's look at an example. I have two existing tables in my database. One is called company, and each company record has a unique ID that is also a primary key of the record. And there is also a staff table. Every record in this table also has a primary key, but it also has the company ID column that stores the ID of the company where the staff member belongs. This company ID column is essentially a foreign key to the company table, even though no explicit foreign key constraint is specified for this table. Let's discover attributes of both tables, starting with the company table. So I create a business object called company. Select its persistence type. Select the database environment. I have created an environment for my test database, and then specifying the name of the table. When I discover attributes of this table, I can see ID, which is a primary key, and name. Let's now discover the staff table. When I click the Discover Attributes button, AwareIM asks a question whether I want to automatically discover foreign key attributes. This only works if there are explicit foreign key constraints defined in the table. Since there are none, I will say no. Now I can see the company ID attribute among the discovered columns. If I click OK, I will see that the company ID attribute has the type number. So AwareIM has not created any automatic relationship with the company table. Let's discover attributes again. This time, after discovering the attributes, I will explicitly tell AwareIM that the company ID column represents the foreign key. So I tick the checkbox next to this column and then click on the foreign key button. AwareIM asks me which table the foreign key points to. I specify the company table. When I click OK, Where I Am prompts me to select the primary key in the company table that corresponds to the company ID foreign key. I select ID. And now when I click OK, I can see that the type of the company attribute is now company. Where I Am has created a reference attribute to the company object. I can now use the power of Where I Am relationships for this object. I can use this reference attribute in business rules, queries, and so on. Now I can even define shortcuts to the individual attributes of the company object in the staff object, and use these shortcuts in the query on the staff object.